All right, you are listening to or watching PH2T3R, Patera, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here as always with my co-host, C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books. And today we are here to talk about alien space dragons and the threat that they pose to our future. But in all seriousness, those of you who are subscribed to our newsletter, got a newsletter I sent out earlier this week that was explained a little bit of this more in depth. And basically, right now in the theaters, there's Alien Romulus. And I went to see it just kind of on a whim. I hadn't seen any ads for it or anything like that. And I as soon as I watched the trailer, I was like, I don't even know if I want to see this because I'm like, this looks like teens in space. And that sounds boring. And irritating. But I went to see it, and it was actually, as a horror movie, it worked fantastically. It was really well done. But as I'm sitting there in the theater, at some point, or maybe when I got home, after I got home, I thought to myself that I'm like, aliens are space dragons, and that's just like, oh, that's okay. Aliens are space dragons. That's kind of cool. And then we started talking about it in the first Man. And I had a couple other guys who were like super into the Aliens movies and had seen them all. And they were like, well, what about this? And well, what about this? And it turns out that aliens from the series Aliens, obviously Xenomorphs as they're known, which is a kind of a generic name that is Greek that could mean, outsider form. It doesn't really mean anything specific as these H.R. Giger created things. But we thought about how many ways that it overlaps with the idea of the dragon that all heroes have to fight, and the dragon of negation that I wrote about in the essay, and all that. And it's pretty one-to-one in most. Not exactly the same thing, and of course the heroes are different because the heroes in these movies are generally women. So there's that, and have been since the 70s. Is it even? I mean, it's feminist, but it's not woke. It's not what we have to deal with now. I mean, this is Sigourney Weaver from like 1979. Now they'd be mad that she's like in her underwear for like a good portion of the movie. And you can kind of see her butt.
What butt there is.
Yeah, there was not much butt there. But she needed to eat a cheeseburger for sure. So first of all, some of the similarities are, obviously these are monsters that only bring death. They're basically negation monsters. They don't really have any society. It's not like an alien society that we're fighting. They're creatures that basically just bring death. And obviously they bring death by inhabiting a human body, like, as a parasite and then breaking out, and that's their part of their gestation period or whatever. There's these black creatures, and they're obviously always black in the movie. They're black. They personify death in space, which is already like a hostile environment. The famous poster that goes with it that we get this saying from is, "In space, no one can hear you scream."
Space itself is a kind of negation.
For sure. Well, I mean, it's weird because we think of it as cosmos in the Carl Sagan way, but cosmos really means the organization. So rather than just whatever, but the space in between is like definitely no man's land.
Right.
You die like instantaneously if you're there. These creatures of death, and they obviously are matriarchal. If you realize from the movie, there's a queen, and she doesn't even. There is no king. They're not fertilized or whatever. There's this queen that like produces these eggs, and you see the queen in several different movies, and that's what's like. So that kind of goes back to the Tiamat myth, one of the most ancient myths of from the Animalists, one of the most ancient myths in the human world, that there's this female deity that then becomes this horrible monster. I mean, you don't really get a sense that she was a horrible monster before she got into dispute with the other entity, the male entity. But there was a dispute, and once there was a problem, then she becomes this horrible monster, and she gives birth to serpents that go out. I mean, so it's very much in line with this whole the queen of the xenomorphs is basically like a Tiamat figure that gives birth to these serpents that are like murder serpents that just go out and murder and eat, and then and then there are more, and then there are more, and there are more and more, and they're impossible to stop. And they even said, I think one of the lines in the Enema Elish that I pointed out in the newsletter actually said that the blood of the serpents was poison, and of course the blood of the aliens is like this acid that can eat through the hull of the ship. So it like if you actually hurt them, then they just bleed, and then it puts you in more danger even when they're dead. So it just really fantastic, comparisons between these ideas, and they look like dragons. Obviously, they to a certain extent they're like humanoid-ish dragons. And then there's also this other element of them when you dig into the aesthetic of them, is that the aesthetic, which is I've known for years, I think everybody knows, it comes from H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist. And I didn't know until I researched for this podcast that the image that the idea came from, I guess someone handed Ridley Scott this book of H.R. Giger's that is the Necronomicon. So it's H.R. Giger basically riffing on H.P. Lovecraft and creating these evil entities and there's a Baphomets in there, and there's all kinds of satanic imagery. So these are basically evil occult creatures from the there's this connection that goes straight through. And I knew of H.R. Giger and the whole satanic connection for years because they were Satanists love H.R. Giger. They love that. They're all this kind of weird erotic imagery that's also evil and deathly. And I knew an artist who made work like that for a while, and it's just there's just a lot there. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about, we talk about ancient dragons, and I think the way that you bring myth into reality is to then redream the myth into the future. I've often pointed out, there's this one comic book that basically puts Hercules, and the story of Hercules, in the far space future. And such a cool story. And that's, in a way, these are dragons envisioned into the future. What would dragons be in space? Well, these things. So it's just an interesting way to talk about dragons and the myth. And I guess before we get into it anymore, because I did way too much research for this show, just because it's fun research. I sat and watched pretty much all the Alien movies again. I'd seen it's not like this is something that I've been a fan of all my life, but I've been alive, and they've been out for a long time, and so I've seen a few of the Alien movies in reruns or on TV or whatever, and then I'm pretty sure I saw Alien Resurrection in the theater, which I think is by far one of the creepiest ones, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit too, because that has some ideas that you were talking about. We had a back and forth about it, but in researching it, I was pointed to some of the other guys, you need to watch Alien versus Predator. And in Alien versus Predator, which is set in 2004, it's technically the first, chronologically, it's the first movie. The rest of them are far future space. But chronologically, it's technically the first movie. And in Alien versus Predator, what you find out kind of in the middle of the movie is that these that predators had created a whole civilization on Earth, basically as their home base for their initiatory ritual. And their initiatory ritual as a warrior culture was that they had to slay dragons. And basically the most horrific whatever beast, they had captured a queen, had it like frozen and like suspended like in chains and stuff under this like Aztec looking temple, and then every so often something would go off and they'd reawaken it, and then the queen would breed, and then they'd show up to, and they'd have humans there to like, you know, be the hosts, and that's their only really job, is to worship these to worship the predators as gods, as like warrior gods from space. And then you know, the predators come and then they slay all the aliens, and they actually mark themselves on the forehead with a glyph, like once they've like slayed the alien, like it's like straight up like warrior initiation stuff. So the myth is like perfect. Like once you see that all together, I'm like, oh, this is now, he slayed the dragon. It is a perfect thing of that, even though these gross fucking predators are fucking gross. But yeah. So and then I guess the myth of the story where that movie starts is that if the aliens win and the predators are unable to defeat them and they just swarm the bit, then, you know, that's how the first civilization that these guys created ended up in Antarctica, because basically they just like not quite nuked it from space because the structures were still there, but they just killed all life around it. So the whole human civilization died and everything because they have to stop the aliens from breeding any further. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the whole like big plot of this and how it fits into the dragon killing myth. And it just, like I said, just from seeing, oh, they look like dragons, to seeing this whole like world evolve. And apparently also next week we're going to have a show on, I always want to say World of Warcraft, and I think these guys
Warhammer 40K. I was holding off because there's a race in the Warhammer 40K universe called the Tyranids that is very, very similar. I almost ended up playing them 20 years ago back in middle school, but my brother picked them, so I picked a different group. But they're very similar, and there's a particular unit called the Gene Stealer in the Tyranid army that is a hybrid unit, and there's some like similarities with the alien universe, but it's just this all-consuming biomass. They're more bugs than dragons, but there's that creepy crawly, maybe snake-like. There's the coolest unit in the, not to digress too much from space, I guess we are still on space alien dragons, but there's a particular unit called the Lictor, which is basically like, think of a praying mantis that's like the height of 3 people, that is really, really good at hiding in things and can pop out and just eat people. That was, I thought, one of the cooler units. And there's some like, it doesn't have that like just run at you and is basically impossible to kill element that these aliens have. But there are bits of the Tyranid army that are like that too, and it's conceptually the same thing. It's just this swarming, all-consuming biomass. And there's actually another army that does the same thing, but is different. They're called the Necrons, and they're also this like, they're much more H.P. Lovecraft. They're like ancient gods, you know, cult that were asleep for thousands of years, and now they're here to very slowly march through. And anyways, it is interesting seeing these similar themes pop up in games, which were almost certainly influenced by movies, which are drawing on themes that were in very, very ancient literature. This was actually my first time seeing Alien, the 1979 version. Wow. I'd never seen it before, so it was an experience watching through, and I realized in watching it that I had seen lots of video commentary about filmmaking in general that was actually talking about this movie that I'd kind of forgotten, and it was coming back. It's like, oh yeah, they're doing this weird thing with the lighting. where they have everyone's faces lit from below to make the dark behind them look more ominous. But it also gives them a like together around the fire kind of vibe was how one analyst described the effect of the lighting. Because even though, plot spoiler, basically everyone dies, all is it eight of the 9 crew members. It's still kind of a story of teamwork and coming together and some of the problems that they run into, but also some heroism, like the captain deciding he's going to go in that vent after this thing. There were a few like really good moments of like people coming together against this seemingly impossible monster. This like, but the thing that struck me the most about the movie, more than anything else, was there's this theme of the calls coming from inside the house, inside your body, as the case may be. And it's not just the alien. It's not just the alien inside the one team member. Now it's on your ship. It's even in your escape pod. It's also there's the second snake, which is the science officer.
Yes,
he's very much a dragon. Almost isn't the right word. It's like this direct snake archetype. This very tricky, cunning, lying, deceitful, crafty character that who has plans that they have not told you of, and they're like, and he's
expendable.
And he's inside your team. So like the image of the snake always like calls, like, you think of traitors. I guess rats is more that too, but there's like some thematic crossover between the alien and Ash, the science officer / medic, who's working for someone who is who cares more about this organism than he cares about the crew.
Which is a repeated theme throughout the series. There's kind of this Frankenstein, like we can get these things and harness their power, kind of thing that goes through it, and just the folly of man trying to do this is the repeated theme that goes through this. And because I'm now the nerd that has watched like all the movies and like and is drawing all the lines on the board and whatever, there's aside from Covenant, which doesn't make any fucking sense. But it's the next movie after the aliens, that comes after the one that you watched. The snake theme, kind of that you talked about just there, is repeated, but it's a person. It's Paul Reiser. It's basically an executive from the company who pretends that he's like on Sigourney Weaver's side. Hey, I know you had a rough time. You just woke up. You're in hypersleep for a lot of but then,
bit of a rough time.
But then, and it talks her into going down to this like planet where they have these things again. It's as a consultant, basically, with a bunch of space marines in the second movie, and then, but he's doing the same thing. She's like, you're going there to kill them, right? Like, basically, like, you're not going there to like study them, right? And he's like, oh yeah. No, he's going there to get like samples again.
Yeah.
And he basically tries to kill her in the movie after she exposes him, and she's like, I'm gonna fucking nail you to the wall over this. You just put all these people, you just basically killed this entire colony, But as a corrupt bureaucrat, he basically then tries to cover his track. It's like as they do, and so yeah, it's again that theme of that deceiver.
And there's also a not to put too fine of a point on it, but there's a very strong, persistent sexual theme here, associated with, and it's associated with snakes too. The only time I remember ever spontaneously calling someone a snake It was in a blog post I wrote years back, was a dean of students at the college that I attended. And he was very two-faced when I was there about freedom of speech in particular, which was like a little personal campaign I was doing. He was like, oh yeah, we value free speech a lot. And then he's at the same time running a bias incident program that was like at the cutting edge of the country, and now has become commonplace in most schools. They have a bias incident policy based on what was at the college I was at. But I found out after I quit college, like 4 or 5 years later, that he was being like arrested and indicted for like sexually molesting and stalking and abusing a mentally handicapped student. Shocking. And a lot of people had really liked him, and this was very surprising to them. And I was like, you guys were selecting for this when you made morality about saying the right things. It's very easy for sociopaths to say the right thing, but that snake-like tendency, that there's always like a sexual dimension to it. And I don't mean that to demonize sex itself, but there's the sneakiness of the sex. I don't know, that it was clearly a literary theme. Like Ash, the science officer, who is he's a robot. He's an asexual character. When he tries to kill Sigourney Weaver's character, he's trying to do it by basically gagging her on a pornographic magazine. And it's like, what a strangely symbolic thing for the director to put in. Like, that's not even sexual in an experiential way. It's sexual in a purely symbolic way, and maybe in a couple different symbolic ways. So the theme is very pointedly pushed into that scene there.
Yeah, I mean, that's, well, rape isn't about sex, it's about power. But except when it's about sex.
That's why there's all these stories of grandmas getting raped all over the country. They're the primary victims of.
Actually, they do. I mean, like, I don't know. As someone who's watched a lot of CSI, whatever kind of bullshit, a lot of serial killers will also go fuck up grandmas too.
Serial killers might be in their own case.
Is different. I mean, like, frat boys are not fucking grandmas for sure. They're not raping grandmas. Yeah. And frat boys are the only thing that feminists have ever been concerned about because they're their peers.
Yeah. But if we're talking about snakes and dragons, sociopaths might be our object. And for the sociopath, it very well might be about power.
Well, yeah, sociopath, that medicalizes the thing. But let's say deceivers.
Yeah, there we go.
If you learn
snakes,
if you're snakes. If you're the kind of guy, there's a certain amount of manipulation that is involved in any kind of even leadership, right? But it's like where you have to withhold a certain amount of information. You have to there's a certain amount of that you have to do. But like with certain kind of salespeople and certain kinds of obviously people who are in positions of power or crave positions of power or whatever, the game is exciting. Like the game of manipulation is exciting. I think for our George Washington good leader archetype, you realize that some manipulation is necessary, but you're trying to create wins for everybody, and you realize that people react to things in certain ways, and you have to negotiate that. But the person who enjoys manipulating people for their own entertainment and satisfaction in the way that I think men like to do harmlessly many occasions, let's just see what he'll do. Let's
screw with each other
and see what he'll do. Just screw with each other. But the people who actually enjoy playing mind games with other people and to see if they can win and to see what can I make you do? What can I convince you to do? What can I convince you to buy? What can I convince you to do? The people who
sales
get
guys
off on that, exactly, sales guys, but also politicians the same way, right? what can I tell you that will make you think that I'm like what I want you to think I am? And
Drunkenness is joy.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to interrupt, but Saxon von Bentley in our comments is saying, "Is it just me or is Jack's sound a bit low?" So,
is it low now?
That's what he's saying. Yeah,
it was too hot last time, so I turned it down to like 25%. I just moved it up a little bit.
There you go. That's good.
A little better.
Okay. Yeah,
but yeah. Well, thank you for letting us know that. So it's not super low. I wish that these. I mean, I guess at some level of production, you have another device in between those devices and whatever, where you can have a mixing board and shit. But we're not really at that level of the game.
And everything gets changed at every point too. I was doing videos and I keep discovering that the default setting on my microphone, every time I pop it open, it's something different. It changes itself. I had set it at 90%. I popped it open to check before getting on here, and it was at 67. I was like, I mean, that's good enough. It's not like the 33% last time I tried to record a video without looking at it. But
that's one thing I wish about this software, specific about StreamYard. I wish I could see the levels, like while I'm looking at, like show me the levels big, not like this little thing I can't see, but show me the levels so that I can see where we're at. Because otherwise, I would just mix us beforehand and make sure we are on point. But I can't see that information until I don't have any feedback. And we don't have a producer here on the side, like checking all that shit, because that's how
it's just us.
Done.
Yeah. So, anyways, back to snakes and sociopaths.
Yes, but like I was saying, people who like playing that game is about power. And like you're saying that there's a sexual element, but that's that line of sex and power. Like. That was one of my, I think, issues with that statement that I was joking about, is that, like, rape isn't about sex, it's about power. Well, for men, sex and power are very interrelated. Like, there's a lot of crossover there. And really for women too, they're just on the other side of it. But the power and domination and sex are all kind of part of the same thing. So, like, to pretend that they're two totally separate concepts that have nothing to do with each other, and like there's an on-off switch, is a little bit misleading. So,
but the way it can be framed can be misleading too. I was just in the video that I had to one of our members very graciously fixed for me, actually. That I was referencing a Stanford biologist named Robert Sapolsky. Yes. Brilliant guy. Highly recommend his lectures. However, he's only human. He makes mistakes the way everybody else does. And in one of his lectures, he mentioned that the neural circuitry of the male brain in particular, the sort of circuits and the program for violence shares some hardware with the circuitry for sex. And he was saying, maybe that explains why so many guys confuse sex with violence. And it took someone with not only no PhD, but no 4-year degree at all, a Canadian commentator named Karen Strawn, to be like, no guy in history has ever mistaken sex for violence. That's not a thing. What happens, let me explain this to one of the top Stanford neurologists in the world. What happens is, the desire for sex or love in general can motivate violence. I.e., if someone you want to have sex with is in some way at risk, either of dying or being had sex with by someone else, you might be motivated to do violence. Like, it is extremely intuitive why these circuits would overlap. And it's not this low resolution, we're just confused because there's some overlapping circuits. That's not how circuits work. And it's not, no guy has ever been confused about that.
Well, yeah, and there's also so many elements of sex that are violent. Like obviously, like. a lot of women like to be choked as if they're being like there's there's all this overlap where like there's and I don't think that's a modern phenomenon.
No,
you know,
no,
like
of course not.
Yeah,
but that's not the same thing as like you've got your M4, you're being shot at, and you're trying to kill the guy who's shooting at you, or you're in a sword fight with someone, and it's like I'm trying to cut your head off. Like that's not the same thing.
For sure. Well, I mean, perfect example. You said sword fights. I mean, I never think about sex during jiu-jitsu. Like it doesn't even cross my mind. Not even like anywhere in the picture. No. But you know, it could be. But like it's not. It's just not at all because you're thinking about like, oh, I don't want this person to strangle me or break my arms, and and I would like to break his arms. That's all you're thinking about. I'm not thinking about like. How you doing? You know, like, you know, and dudes even like you know, because men roll with women and stuff all the time, and that's generally not an issue that comes up. It is a little bit more difficult. I mean, I'm uncomfortable rolling with them just because you get your. I'm like you don't want your hands to be in places that they could be. You know, like I mean, like I said, it just feels like a landmine of sexual accusations.
I went to a jiu-jitsu class once. And I rolled with another white belt, a blue belt. I rolled with a black belt, just got absolutely crushed.
Sure.
Fascinating. But I did end up rolling with a chick, and like for me, the thought did cross the mind. It's kind of hard to avoid. That was one of those things that like could have ended up more in like getting someone's number than like getting called on, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a little bit of that too, Mike. Like I said in the group actually today, I was talking to my coach, and then we'll get off of this. But I was talking to my coach last night, my professor in jiu-jitsu, and he had just gone to the big ADCC CGI thing in Vegas, which is a big, massive thing in jiu-jitsu. And he's like, I can't believe I've been doing this for long enough that I have a black belt. And this is the first time I really were like, there are actual jiu-jitsu hoochies now. There are hoochie mama like jiu-jitsu chicks that are like basically like, and I was like, you mean lot lizards? And he's like, yeah. and he's like, oh, I'm using that. And he put it in his story this morning. But yeah, I mean, like, because, you know, like subcultures of men, when they get high status enough, or they're just like ripe for the pickings, there will be a certain kind of like woman that will be like, I'm going to attach myself to that subculture.
Okay. And so that's less lot lizard. That's more groupie then, isn't it?
Kind of. Yeah. But I like lost lizards better.
It's like, funny.
It's funnier. But they're there. Really, yeah, like basically the same thing as groupies. Like they're there to like who can I hook up with, whatever. They don't care about jiu-jitsu, but like they've taken on the feeling of caring about jiu-jitsu to be there. And he's like, and then there are like female black belts walking around too, and that's a totally different fucking thing. But there are these chicks, and he's like, and it's a thing. Like obviously, they're there for a year or two, and suddenly they're purple belts. Because you know, like they're working on. They found this black belt to like pony up to, and like you're like kind of like, and he's like, here, I'll show you the way. And you know, like there's a lot of that. I mean, I said it's kind of like a CrossFit coach phenomenon. You know, like oh baby, I'll help you all the way. And you know, it's so there's that phenomenon. He's like, that's just fucking gross. Yeah, but,
you know, it is gross, but at the same time, our good friend Ajax was getting a bunch of questions in his Instagram, and one interesting woman asked him, "How can I lower my libido?" And he's like, "Well, libido is a symptom of being healthy. So here's how you lower your libido: stop sleeping well, eat like crap, don't work out as much, stress out about the news, and like a few other things. It's like if you are healthy and getting good sleep and are generally just fit and feeling good, you are going to have a high libido. So maybe consider getting a boyfriend." And I was learning just today the fact that the number of the percentage of men who are virgins at the age of 18 is at about 80% in the United States. In the 1950s, it was at about 8%, supposedly. Now, men were also getting married much younger. Right. But like
there was a lot of like fucking your 14-year-old like cousin, like back in the 50s, like
maybe not all great, but also not maybe not the worst kind of gross that could happen to a society, because to bring it back to Alien.
Yes.
Alien is, for all the sexual symbolism worked into it, a profoundly asexual entity. And I from the little tidbits I saw of some of the other movies, that seems to be the direction of the progression of like evolution that they're pursuing. When Ash, in his partially decapitated headless form, was asked if he like what he likes or admires about this horrible creature, he says it's the perfection of it.
Right.
It is so pristine in its resilience and in its aggressiveness. It is so purely what it is that there's something very admirable to the sort of Neoplatonist mindset of that pursuit of purity and perfection. And these complex, muddled, schizoid humans with their gross, divided interests and stuff. It's very it's something to look down upon if you have a kind of mathematical purist mentality. And there's something like the perfect is the enemy of the good captures it in substance, but it doesn't nearly convey the depth of how destructive this like single-minded pursuit of purity and perfection can go. And that does, like, there's an initial sort of superficial sexual element to it, but the ideal actually does away with that entirely, and is this pure it's this pure thing that destroys everything else.
Yeah, and it's the same transhumanist kind of thinking process that we've talked about before. This kind of hatred of the body, because that mentality, and of course, like an android would have it, because he's like, people are stupid, right? But that's the way a human who hates humans imagines an android to be. Really, I mean, that sci-fi guys who like hate, like who want to transcend our form, like that's also how, because we've actually, I don't believe, at least, there's some contention about this, but I don't believe that we've actually, we is a weird word, but that contact has been made. Maybe it has, I don't know. But like, I don't know that extraterrestrial contact has been made, and I think it's a lot of people hallucinating things. But the hallucination is a sexless creature. If you look at what gray men are, they are skinny, sexless, basically like the ultimate Nietzschean last man. They've now, all they do is look at computers. Their eyes are big, like their eyes are gigantic. They have giant brains and like tiny garbage bodies that like don't do anything. And that's how people envision aliens, or like a more highly evolved humanoid form being, is being post-sexual. And that's, it says something probably about who's doing the imagining most of the time. But, like, is that, I mean, I guess I can see from a lot of guys, I mean, we know some guys are on their like several divorces in. And so like, I could see a fantasy of like, could we be free of all this mess?
Yeah, I mean, that's like Cephalus from the Republic, saying, very happy to be free of that angry demon. But exactly. I don't think those guys speaking on the other side of experience are the ones writing sci-fi. in that way.
Probably not, but also like when you, because and this is where it becomes like which came first, chicken and the egg, who is influencing who, and probably that image has been implanted through culture, and it probably did come from like the nerdy sci-fi guy. But there are a lot of people who have had whatever their alien experiences, and they all see the same thing. And it's probably because it's planted in culture, but they're not always the sci-fi guy. They're not always that guy. Some of them are like, I'm a farmer and I saw the aliens came in, they touched my butt. Or whatever. I mean, the guy I live with is super into this shit, so I've seen like a million testimonies of like people who think that they've seen aliens and all this stuff like that. And I just always kind of roll my head because they're always the same. And the other joke about it, I think, is that they only come to America. there isn't as much of this in the rest of the world. The UFOs and whatever, they mostly come to America. So do we have any?
I was just gonna say there's this author that I don't always agree with, but I like. He's a Christian blogger named Vox Day, and he's written a couple really fun debate books, one on free trade and one on the existence of gods. And his interlocutor on the existence of gods had an interesting argument. He basically, Vox Day makes the classical historical evidentiary argument for God and for Jesus in particular. And his interlocutor, whose name I forget, basically says, I'm going to accept all your arguments as historically valid, and I'm going to advance my own. And he uses the same standard of evidence to advance the existence of UFOs. Like the standard of evidence that would legitimize the historical case for Jesus, it turns out also does a more than sufficient job, a much better job of legitimizing the existence of UFOs, which is something that most people are fairly skeptical of for a variety of reasons. First of all, like it's become a bit of a meme that like no one is capable. It's actually against the laws of physics to capture video of Sasquatch or UFOs on anything higher resolution than a potato. It's always grainy footage,
Yeah.
And when it is, it turns out it's like a plastic bag flying in the wind. People are like it was moving in ways that were not possible. It's like that was a plastic bag.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot or you getting touched by aliens, like that might have less to do with aliens and more have to do with the dosage of hallucinogens you took an hour prior.
Right.
Or whatever the case may be. There was an interesting thread also posted by Ajax like a year ago about the interesting kinds of drugs that were probably responsible for many of the admitted cases of witchcraft back in like the 1600s. It was not like people had a trip and they're like, wow, I tripped really hard. It's like the trip makes you think you actually did things. I actually turned into a werewolf. I actually flew on a broom. People were admitting to things with sincerity that they thought they had actually done. And some of those plants are specific to North America. They're not found in other parts of the world. Might have to do with other kinds of sightings that only happen in North America and not other parts of the world. Accidentally, perhaps, or intentionally in some cases. So,
yeah.
But anyways,
I definitely think that there's people who have been like stone sober and had their things, and I don't know what causes that or whatever. But anyway, back to, first of all, let's see if we have any questions that need to veer off into some area.
Bert says, more dragon slander, let's go. Jack Gibbers says, praise it, bros of sunshine. Brock says, never trust an android with a god complex. That's, you can take that to the grave with you.
That's a recurring theme in the movies for sure.
It's a recurring theme in a lot of places. Don't trust ChatGPT either, by the way.
Yeah.
But and then Saxon Van Bentley, in response to your audio shift, said, "Yep, sounds good now."
Cool.
So,
I guess one of the other things I wanted to bring up about the series, since we're kind of doing a deep dive on the series, because there's a lot there. I'm not one of these people who really is like, gets into fan wikis and all this kind of shit. That's not my thing. But like having sat and watched all these, and my favorite still after rewatching all of them is Alien Resurrection. And just because it's kind of the creepiest one in terms of body horror, which we were talking about. And again, there's like a sexual element, but it's like beyond sexual. Like it basically, like you have basically the premise of that movie, which is kind of one of the, I think, more, better done ones of the series, is that Sigourney Weaver's dead. Like she dies in movie 3, I think. And I tried to make it, that one was actually kind of the most boring one I found, and I didn't really get through it. But she dies at the end in theory. But they found some of her blood, and like hundreds of years later, bring her back. Like scientists bring her back, and because she dies with a queen inside of her. And it basically killed her. I'm assuming she killed herself or something. I don't know. But she dies with a queen inside of her, like gestating or whatever. And so they bring her back, and their DNA is intermingled, and so they want to bring a queen back. So they're trying to like bring this queen hybrid thing back. And so in the process, they managed to get both this queen and also Sigourney Weaver comes back with like substantial amount of her memory, but she's different and weird. Like she kind of has a lot of the traits of the alien mixed up in her, like her blood actually like has the, you just find this out. She doesn't really know it. She doesn't really know who she is. She slowly is like figuring this stuff out, and she kind of has like there's this scene where she throws a basketball, like someone fucks with her, and she's like super aggressive, and she throws a basketball over her head without looking, and it goes into the hoop. Like she's like has this very like superhuman kind of thing about her. She's become predatory, and like I said, she wipes her nose, that bleeds a little bit, and drops it, and you see on the floor it like sizzles because she's got a little bit of the alien blood thing going, and so she kind of becomes this version of herself that's part alien, like part this creature, and she's connected to it, and that's one of the most horrific scenes that stuck with me. And of course, they've also brought the queen out, and so they have the queen, and they think that they've put it in a special container that they can't get out of, or whatever, and then brought humans in, like kind of illegally, to like serve as the hosts for the new breed, and they're going to again study these aliens and try and get something out of them, the same theme over and over again. And as all this goes to shit, and the aliens figure out how to get out and like whatever, and just start, and Sigourney Weaver hooks up with this crew of people, and they pass this room, and she has like number 8 like tattooed on her arm, and she passes room 7, and she's like, and so she goes and walks into room 7, and it's basically all the times they had tried to clone her before. So like just disgusting, messed up versions of her, like fused with the alien, and like just horrific. Like it's like an old circus sideshow of like body of like horrors, like in these tanks, and a couple of them are still alive. And so like here's this person like who's still at least part human, and she's seeing this and like just horrified because she's seeing like multiple versions of herself that are like disfigured and like all this stuff, and like really intense scene. And then at the end she walks in, and there's this version of herself that looks like her but is also part alien and can't move, and is all like sat on this table saying, "Kill me." and so she ends up killing herself, basically a version of herself with fire, and then just fire through the whole room. It's a very powerful scene, because obviously she's killing multiple versions of herself.
Moral of the story is don't do gain of function research. Stop it.
For real. That's basically what it is. And then there's another element to that movie that makes it interesting, is that because she's part of the mother, she actually then gets attracted to it and then goes and finds it and ends up kind of in this weird embrace of the mother, like the two of them together. And then, because their DNA was fused, the mother, after going through the first cycle of its reproductive cycle, like I said, I've obviously gotten way too nerdy about this. After going the first cycle of its normal reproductive, it added a layer, which is a human birth. So it actually has a womb because of the fusion of the two of them. And so then a human alien hybrid is born out of the womb of this creature and looks at Sigourney Weaver and thinks Sigourney Weaver is its mother. And so there's this whole other thing, the relationship going on, and that's the in the room thing. That's the creature that gets out and gets on the pod going back to Earth with them, and she has to kill this thing who is part her that thinks it's her mother.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think that's the most intense, psychologically interesting movie. And of course, there's also another. The twist in that movie too is that Winona Ryder is the android. And Winona Ryder is the android, but she's a weird model that's a good android. And so she's actually there to help try and kill the aliens. And so it's kind of a twist on that whole thing. I think that's by far, I think, the weirdest movie of them and the most interesting psychologically. There's another one that I think is popular with a lot of people generally just because of some of the crossover elements in it, and that's Prometheus. And that's the one where they actually, the Wyland Corporation guy goes out and they go to and they're trying to find who made us. Is the whole idea of the movie. They're trying to find who made humans. And that's the part of the quest, and this crew goes out and they encounter these aliens in the process of that. Because the aliens had overrun the people who had created them who are known as the engineers. And the engineers are basically what people imagine Nietzsche and Superman are, but not they're. We know that that's not what it means, but what people imagine, that they're just bigger than us and bald and just kind of jacked and whatever. And so the one of the big interesting parts that interweaves with all of this comparative mythology that we talk about is that the android in that movie has been trained to speak to these creatures, and they speak Proto-Indo-European. So there's actually, the creatures actually speak. So he's actually training as he's going the movie. He's doing, I think it's Schleicher's Fable or something like that. It's one of the stories that they tell in Proto-Indo-European in the studies of it, of the language. And he's learning to recite that in Proto-Indo-European. So some scholar had been consulted, and that was worked into the movie. And then he actually does talk to the engineers. But the plot part is obviously that the engineers are like, "Why the fuck did you wake us up? And you guys are pieces of shit. Fuck you." and then get super murdery about it. So that theme of that one is basically the quest for meaning in life, who created us. But as we have said many times, is going to look for the aliens that created us doesn't actually solve the problem of God. It just kicks the can down the road.
Yeah.
But again, they've done a lot of conceptually interesting stuff with that movie.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think it was worth putting off to last, but to me it feels like there's a kind of ideological component to this as well, of the idea of people, of things getting inside you and like bursting out and destroying you in the process. It's a very easy and natural way to symbolically think about how people can become ideologically possessed by ideas, and some particularly nasty ones, and our old friend Yuri Bezmenov comes to mind too, where some of these things are terminal, and not just in the sense of like get the wrong idea and you'll wind up sterilized, but like in modern times, but even what we might call softer ideas can demoralize people such that they can no longer perceive reality properly, and it's permanent.
Yeah.
So like the idea of alien ideas, and it's easy to get very one-sided in this. It's easy to think like politically is like, oh, you're talking about that other side, but it's like ideas in general of certain kinds can infect people, and like what's the is it cordyceps? What's the I'm probably misremembering the name.
So. I think
the fungus that repurposes the end of the organism. It's like you're no longer doing your thing. Right. You are now, we've given you a software upload or hardware upload in that case.
Yes.
You are now going to do this other thing that will kill you, but will advance my interests. If you're a fungus. And the nastiest version of this, I didn't get the pleasure of seeing these guys myself, but there are specific species of parasitic wasps that will, I believe the jewel wasp is one. There's a few who will sting, usually like a spider or a cockroach, and they will lay an egg inside the cockroach or the spider, and it basically does the alien thing.
Yeah.
The larvae eats the animal, which is alive for another few days, from the inside out. I think maybe a few weeks. The ones I got to see were mud daubers, which are very common in Western Washington, and they would paralyze spiders and bring them back to their nests and trap the spiders inside their nests where the larvae would eat the spiders, and you'd pull these mud little round oval things off usually inside attics, and there are these little caverns just full of desiccated spider husks. It was actually really metal, and if we were 3 inches tall, it would be a freaking pre-written horror novel in every person's attic, basically. Right. So it's easy to see the sort of artistic and thematic inspiration from nature, as well as the sort of symbolic representation of our own experience with deceivers and perhaps large snakes. I'm sure Jordan Peterson would have something to say about this. We're freaking chimpanzees full of snakes or whatever it is. It feels like there's a lot of layers of symbolism worked into this, and perhaps most of it unintentionally, which I think is probably the coolest kind of symbolism to see in literature. So densely packed in there. It's a very rich film, not just in its symbolic content, but the music score, the lighting. I saw one commentator talking about how they expanded the scale of your environment by filming, especially in the early shots where there's lots of like people talking over breakfast about shares and so forth. They shot it in such a way that there was always one person that was only half in the shot. Like they were intentionally cutting people in half in the shot, and it sort of set you in the scene and gave an almost panoramic effect of the experience. It was just lots of just cool little things to nerd out on in the storytelling technique, as well as the symbolic content of these space dragon invaders.
For sure. I mean, that's its own rabbit hole too. That's the cinematography and how making a shot, the way you take the shot may change the way you feel about it. It is a special kind of magic that they do, which is super neat to me. I mean, as an aesthetics guy, that's it's really interesting to see what you can do with that kind of stuff. And I watch a lot of videos about that kind of stuff. I haven't gotten a lot recently. I must not have been clicking on the right things on Instagram, but there's whole lists of like, if you shoot from this angle, it'll have this emotional feel, and if you shoot from this angle, it'll have this emotional feel, and like there's all these different ways that they shoot people that can it can change the entire environment and mood of the whole scene. But yeah, these are great horror films, and that's a big. Like I said, I was really surprised. The newest one, the Romulus one. It made me remember about that film, and I won't ruin as much of that one because it's out in the theaters and people don't want to see it. But I mean, it was a full. I think it was a full hour of me sitting there with a drink in my hand, like not wanting to take it because like what's gonna happen. It was like one of those like it was like boom, 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 fuck. Like it was really high paced. It was impressive in that way, but it also has one of the stars of it is kind of like I think the guy who actually took the show as a character, as a human character, really was the guy playing the android, because he got a software upload in the middle of it that changed his entire like motivation and like who he was. And then and so like it became like he had to change, he had to become a different character. Actually, it was interesting. He was like kind of a goofy android, and all of a sudden becomes like the super android. He basically got an upgrade in the middle of the thing that made him more kind of like the first one. But so it was an interesting like plot twist there. But yeah, I mean, just there's so much in that the series and all the symbolism, and I guess like I said, the main theme I think that I see through the whole series, aside from like Alien versus Predator and whatever, although that kind of too, because that is a billionaire that goes out to fuck with something because he thinks it's cool, and gets fucked, but the Alien versus the whole series really has again that Frankenstein vibe of like don't mess with things that you don't understand and can't control. This will get out of hand time and time. That's the lesson that the company Weyland Yutani or whatever, like the company learns over and over again, is that they send some people out to get this thing to make a weapon out of it, and then everyone dies. Like every single time, everyone dies, but they keep doing it for basically hundreds of years in the series, and but every time they try to fuck with this thing, everyone dies.
Of saying they didn't learn.
Yes, they didn't learn. Like everyone dies every time. That's kind of the moral of the story. Like, there are things that you shouldn't fuck with in the world, and that you can't control. I think is actually kind of like the big overarching moral of the story is like there are things that are beyond you that humans can't control, and if you fuck with them, you'll die. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of like I said, that's what's going. We were in her knowing character in Resurrection as she's come back from the dead, and she's like, and they're like, oh well, we have much more advanced technology now, and she's like, it's not going to matter, you're all going to die. She's just like deadpanning it, like you're all going to die.
It's hubris. It's hubris that invokes menace, which is this indiscriminate consequences for rising above your station, essentially.
Yes.
And there's a like a sort of classist way of talking about rising above your station, like, oh, right, you're not qualified to have an opinion about science.
Stay in your lane.
You stay in your lane.
Yeah.
But and like we can argue about that, and indeed that argument is actually a big feature of the Iliad. Is like, the lower king might be actually better than the higher king. Who's to say? But there are certain things that are above your station as a human.
Right.
As a human being. And screwing with alien bioweapons might be up there. Or certain kinds of viruses, for that matter.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, that's, or like you can create AI. Like things beyond your understanding you probably should not fuck with, that you don't know if you can contain or not. You probably shouldn't fuck with. But that is obviously what humans also try to do. That's historically, and we've been, I don't want to take credit for it and say we, but I mean, they've been pretty good at domesticating things.
You can bet that some people will. And you can't stop that. Some people are going to do crappy things, and there's going to be horrible consequences. But you don't have to be one of them.
Right. Right.
Because sometimes they get away with it. Oftentimes they don't. I'll bet some of the people who suffer the worst kinds of diseases are the people who are doing gain of function research in and they haven't figured out the right safety protocols yet. I'm sure they have now.
Oh yeah. You're all gonna die.
We figured it all out now. But imagine
it's not gonna matter. You're all gonna die.
Imagine messing around with gain of function research back in like the 1940s.
Yeah.
Because they were thinking about stuff like that. Someone was. So it's like the people who used to like practice surgery before they realized that washing your hands was a good idea. It's like, you screw around with this stuff, and you have to be careful condemning this stuff too harshly, because screwing around is also how you learn things. So there's like a responsible way to screw around.
Fuck around, and then you find out.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but my dad was telling me, my dad was a scuba diving instructor as well as a diver in Southeast Asia for a while. The way that the Navy came up with its dive chart was by fucking around and finding out. They sent divers down to different depths for different lengths of time, bring them back up. Oh, this one got bent. Being bent means like you get air bubbles in your places you're not supposed to get air bubbles. Because you come up too hot. So they just made a chart by trial and error with divers. That was how they came up with the chart. I mean, it's, on the one hand, ethically, it's a terrible thing to do. But like, basically, whenever you're messing around with stuff like that, if you create a business beyond a certain size, you are taking on, in some sense, responsibility for the well-being and the financial income of your employees. So if you screw up, you're now responsible for that.
Yeah.
If you take that logic too far, like, should you never start a business? Like, because of the risk? Well, like, there's smart ways to take risks and there's not smart ways to take risks. But like, if your risk involves an alien face hugger, that is maybe one to to put off for some time. I have a hard time getting over the visual of that, because I grew up in the late 90s, early thousands. So it was at Half-Life, had the head crabs, and I think there was something similar in Halo. There was a few images, but it seems like Alien was the first of its kind, the first fantasy sci-fi show where it had a parasitic organism that would latch onto your face in this way. There's something very, very visually powerful about that image. and describing the way it would choke someone into submission and latch on, and then when they pried it open, you can't look at that thing and not like imagine what it would be like over your face, being like suffocated like that. Is a very very powerful visual image. There's like I think I saw someone in the comments saying like an idea like that is like a once in a generation horror concept. And I think that might be true. Which is not to say there aren't other like very compelling horror concepts out there. But
it's something unique of its own. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but anyways, the whole hubris menace thing is a tricky one to navigate, and maybe it's one of those things that you just need experience to know what your place is, and if you don't know what your capabilities are, probably better to err on the side of caution, I suppose. But then again, how would you convince a sociopath that they're not in a position to mess with this stuff?
Yeah, or just we admire supremely confident individuals when it works out.
Yeah.
Like extremely confident individuals also sometimes doesn't work out. So it's but when it works out, we're like, holy shit, he was amazing. But when it doesn't work out, we're like, what an idiot. But it's basically the same impulse in the same person, but it's just like whether or not it worked out. Like what they bet. I mean, how retarded is it that people are like, I think we can fly. like absolutely asinine. Like that someone would be like, I mean, all of human history, but like, I mean, of course, there's like the Icarus myth and all that kind of shit, but like generally speaking, people would be like, "You're an idiot, and you deserve to be, like a splat on the ground."
Have you not read the Icarus myth? Have you not read about Icarus and Daedalus? Don't you know what happens to people who try to fly?
Exactly. We have stories about this. This is a bad idea. But some dudes kept doing it, and there were some like bumps in the road. Like the Hindenburg, like little
going.
Yeah. Don't say that.
Sorry.
You're gonna die. You have a family. And you're in Washington. But yeah, I mean, there's little bumps in the road along the way, but I mean, it's still amazing. I mean, it was a retarded idea, but it's pretty amazing that like some people get afraid of flying, and like on the list of shit that I'm afraid of, that doesn't even register. Like I love flying. Like I mean I don't like being cramped in a tiny little seat and all that shit. But like or dealing with the airport. But I actually it's neat. I don't get scared at all. Like I think it's pretty cool. Like I said, I have this. It's become part of the lore that I play the exact same song, timed for the exact same, because the runway is the same every time. Like when they hit, as soon as they hit the jet engines, it's like 15 to 30 seconds, something like that. Before it gets lift.
Is the song "Danger Zone" by Kenny Loggins?
No, it is not.
Why is it not "Danger Zone"?
It's actually "Flight" "Flight" from Man of Steel by Hans Zimmer.
Oh,
and it's I have it timed. If I think it's at 110, the into it, because it starts with, and then it's like there's a point where the light is like usually right when you take off. It's like I have it timed, so it's like right there. I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years, like maybe more. But yeah, it's I don't know. I like it. It makes me happy. But I think it's an amazing experience, and again, something that only happened because humans fucked around and found out about shit. I mean, I feel that way too about the dudes who like rock climb like
free climbing
1,000
El
feet in the
Capitan
air.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, you fucking dipshit. But it's it's amazing that people can do it.
Yeah. Like those parkour videos you were talking about last time.
Exactly. Same thing. Same thing.
Well, I wonder, like, that hubris element could be worked into ideas as well. Like we talked about, like ideas sort of parasitically taking over people's bodies. But you and I mess around with, ideas of the dragon itself. As you've pointed out, like the dragon isn't wrong, but entertaining the ideas of the dragon, like that's not for everybody. And it's not something that anybody should do too much, It's the Nietzsche thing about staring too long into the abyss.
Yeah, you were just setting that up. Yeah, like I was ready to do it.
Well,
yeah.
but even so, like understanding that risk, there is a way to read, for example, like Jean-Paul Sartre or Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts, like his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. Like there are some dark, very powerful, very interesting texts that with very dark ideas that are worth addressing. We got a little taste of that in the Republic with Thrasymachus. Like we were taking the argument for power seriously. Like if not in the first book, then at least in the fifth and sixth books. We're entertaining ideas of gender equality, of having wives in common. But it's not something that you would do lightly. I think this is something we've talked about before, but like it is like a dangerous alien entity that if you handle it carelessly, it can take over, if not your body, but you'd be unwise to think it couldn't, someone else that you share it with.
Well, in your sense that you always say that there should be an age limit on when you're allowed to discuss, free will. Like free will.
Like telling high school kids that there's no such thing as free will is like you're setting them up to have a very, very that could really if you tell that to 10 high school kids, you're setting up one or two of them to have existential nightmares for 6 months to a year. Not all of them, not even most of them.
Or just go down a path of nihilism.
You could really screw up a couple of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think more than that. I think you could screw up 80% of them. It's just certain things that you don't need to know to say. It's also not good to know how corrupt people are. Probably until you're a little older.
Which is ironically the justification that Plato offers for we should tell them some myths, some noble lies to help facilitate. It's like I get the psychological truth behind what you're talking about, but maybe we're taking it too far, and maybe that itself becomes a kind of alien that we can lose control of. Because the justification for the noble lie can take off on its own as well.
For sure, because the lie is the lie, and I mean that's a myth can take off on its own. I mean that's as we were talking about actually yesterday, because I don't meditate often, but what I do, I have downloads of big things that I need to talk about and do, and I kind of went back to the idea of solar idealism, and fundamentally the idea of it, I was unsatisfied with my selection of gods. I mean that's why I really made Fire in the Dark. That's why I wrote it. I was like I'm unsatisfied with my options here, and I feel like there needs to be something new, and there needs to be new gods in the world, and and the idea of creating them. And you suggested like no one's really done that consciously, and I'm like, well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But like, what happens down the road is that maybe someone did create it consciously, but then the believers took over.
Yeah.
Like, well, and then it like with anything, you can create something, but you don't have control over what happens to it necessarily.
That's true.
If you like, think of all these people who've written movies that like just got out, like they've done movies or they've done books or whatever that just got, someone ran with part of it, and just it got out of control. Like it wasn't what I mean. Perfect example. American Psycho. I mean that's written as a critique of that character of the Wall Street. To have 3 decades later, young men imitating it.
So same thing kind of happened.
Not what was intended.
Same thing kind of happened with Alan Moore's Watchmen. Rorschach was supposed to be this kind of gross, unlikable character, and Alan Moore was very displeased to find that people really liked him.
yeah. Well, or for example, like with the Batman movies and the Joker, all the kids who identify with the Joker.
Also, Alan Moore's contribution.
Okay. Yeah. So he's done this a lot. He has problems. No, but
he does.
No, but you can never control the way that someone takes your words, and they can take. But the Nazis and Nietzsche. Like, if you want to talk about something that got out of control. That was not meant to be a certain way. The way the Nazis took Nietzsche and just ran with Ubermensch and like fuck the rest. Like that's there's a lot there. And I've met someone once who thought a lot of people have read Nietzsche at a young age and had been influenced by it, and they're like, I want to become the Ubermensch. I'm like, that's not what it is. But like I met one man who was a quite accomplished racist, and he believed that you had to have the right stock to create the Ubermensch, and that's what he started with Nietzsche and ended up in white nationalism, because to bring about the Ubermensch. And I was like, well, that's interesting. That's I don't think Nietzsche would have gone there, and I don't think that's whatever, but that was his theory, his personal motivation, which is interesting.
But, well, people find what they're looking, what they want to find in a lot of these texts. But I mean that sort of brings us back to the question of gods too. If we are dissatisfied with our options, which I feel the same way. Like in many ways, I wanted to be a Christian in 2015, 2016, even 2017. I was going through the motions and trying. I just couldn't. I just couldn't bring myself to believe it. It was so clearly and became more clearly incorrect. But everything else seemed foreign, seemed not, seemed alien, one might say, seemed like it was someone else's God, And so we have, but if you create a God and the search was for something to believe in, the sense in which one believes in a God would have to alter. It's not impossible. Or the other option is one would have to discover, unearth a new God. And I don't know what that difference would look like. I think you can
unearth a new God, because a new God, unearthing a new God would be like just unearthing an ancient thing.
Perhaps the God that we discover was waiting to be found all these years, like some Lovecraftian power from the other world.
Well, I think the way this really happens is that, like I said, I've always believed that there are people behind the scenes who, like leaders who are this is how we're going to, this is like the noble lie. Like, here's what we need to have happen. And these people kind of believe this anyway. And so let's just like play this up and play this down and like let's let it percolate and become a thing. Because it's useful in many ways and it could be good in many ways and whatever. And then, but the people run with it. Like the lay people run with it. And I think that's how most religions really occurred. There's someone who knows what's going on at the beginning and is conscious of it. And then at some point, it takes on a life of its own, and you can't actually control what happens after that. Like, I mean, there's so many weird religions that happen that you're like, where did this even come from? Like Mithraism. Like, it was clearly like a combination of a whole bunch of shit that got riled together. And there was someone who was like, wait, what like combine these things, and someone had to do the first Mithraic ritual. That didn't, I mean, like someone made that up, like at some point, and same thing happened with all these, and then you get the people who believe it all the way because they've worked it into their fantasy structure. Like I've always said about like I said with Germanic paganism, I that was a big thing. It's like you have this religion that has a fantasy structure around it, like all the Vikings and all the but that's all historical and there's not actually a lot of information. But the idea of the Vikings are these crazy, awesome guys who didn't care about death and wanted to die in Valhalla and just went and basically, I mean, they're pirates who basically raided a whole bunch of places and all the ancient lore that we have of it is priests writing down, I can't believe these savages came and did all this stuff. Savages, yeah. And so there's this romantic idea of these things, and then you had people in the 20th century, as I talked about in my video about Germanic paganism. It's like you had these people in the 70s who were like, we need something like that, let's create it. And they started creating it, but then you'll have guys 20, 30 years down the road right now who are like, I talked to Tyr today. And like I straight up, and it took root in their imaginations. They have a personal relationship with that God, and I've gotten there myself where I had that kind of feeling. It's a process that you go through, so you get to that place with these things, especially if you feel like there are other people who feel the same way, because then you're not crazy, right? Because if it's just you by yourself doing that, then you're crazy. But if there's a whole bunch of people around, like if there are 10 people in the room and they all believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and they like feel that he talks to them personally, that's normal. Yeah. Like that's normal now. Like, okay, oh, what did God say to you?
It's been, to borrow a phrase, normalized.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's how human stuff works, and that's how all this stuff works. And that we're talking about these mind viruses.
One of my favorite quotes, I forget who said it, but it was from a Frenchman in the 19th century. He was in an insane asylum, and he was being interviewed for some reason. He said, "They said I was crazy. I said they were crazy, and damn them, they outvoted me."
That's kind of how it works.
Yeah,
that's how reality kind of works. And the thing is, like, I'm not saying this in this like haughty, like new atheist way of like they have a God delusion, but because it's normal like, for our species.
At the psychological level, postmodernism is true. Where the postmodernists run into problems is when they try to project the psychological and social reality of consensus onto the physical world. And then you end up with 5-year programs that starve millions of people and so forth.
Right.
There are limits to this. But when we're talking about ideals and this sort of gods and this concept of legitimacy, as in like who has authority and who is competent to talk about this and that, it's a fine line because all of these things kind of interact with reality. But at the social level, it's mostly in the mind. And so it's easy to see why the postmodernists were so compelling, compelling enough to lead entire nations into starvation, during the 20th century.
I mean, like I said, the dragon's not wrong. But then, like, what is good? And then we get back to that discussion of what is good and what do we want?
Yeah,
it's just not. It's not that the dragon is wrong, but it's okay. Well, what the
rightness, the rightness of the dragon loses its luster when people realize that the dragon will lead you to starvation, and in response to the starvation, the dragon says, "Is that really so bad?"
Right.
And people are like, oh shit!
Actually, what
objectively,
it says is,
there's
and
nothing.
Here's why that's a good thing.
Right.
That is the voice of the dragon. And it's your fault. And here's why that's a good thing. Like all these things that come out of the media these days that are like American IQs might be dropping, and here's why that's a good thing, and stuff, shit that just is obviously like dragon speak. But it is this whole reality thing is a bit of a and maybe we're doing a terrible job. Maybe I'm being a terrible cult leader here, in sense of like we are maybe talking a little bit too much from the behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, in terms of like, well, how do we do this? How does it happen? Because I'm trying to do a good thing, obviously.
Well, but I don't know that we are, though, because I mean, we're both in our own sort of ways. We've been behind the curtain, and once you have, to borrow another Nietzschean phrase, been disillusioned once, you've been disillusioned to illusions in general. You lose one worldview, and you sort of lose hope in worldviews as a whole. And so, if we're both looking for gods, like we're not like satisfied as atheists. The only religion that will remain satisfying is one that can survive, hopefully, with the workings behind the curtain being known, because we're there.
Yeah,
right? And I don't mean to be too arrogant, in saying like, oh, I've seen behind the curtain, I know all this stuff. So no, obviously, like there's a lot of shit we don't know, but we've been through one loss of religion, or maybe two or three, and that's an experience that changes you, and not everyone has lost their religion in that way, what kind of religion is satisfying to someone who has already lost religion once or twice? That seems like an important psychological feature to take into account.
I was cycling through lyrics just now because of the words that you said, and
losing my religion.
All I can say is, oh no, I've said too much. I was like, what's relevant in here? And I'm like cycling through, I'm like seeing the video from like the 80s in my head, but which was such a big thing at the time. But I remember when that came out. But it's it's an interesting thing in so much of what we experience is consensus reality, and it's really become very difficult because we have seen behind a lot of curtains recently. Especially I think like I said, all the questioning of institutions and everything that's been happening over the past few years. What is in a psyop? Like what isn't it? Like today, actually, we had this discussion in the house, which I thought was funny because I've never even like thrown this out there before here. But Lucy was like, because he reads X like stuff. I always have to like be like, what are you reading? Where did that come from? Like whatever. And he's like, they're banning nicotine because it's good for you and it like cures all this stuff. They're banning nicotine, like all the shit countries, like with who hate freedom of speech and all these other things are banning nicotine like a really high rate, like Canada and England and all the other places that are like, basically banning everything else good. They're all banning like like pockets and all kinds of stuff like that at a really high rate, and it's he was like, obviously there are alternative scientists that say it like does all this thing and it's not really actually addictive. And I'm like, dude, you know that I was a pack-a-day smoker, and you've watched me quit like hundreds of times, and it is one of the hardest things I've ever done. I smelled someone smoking today, and I was like, oh yeah, that smells amazing. Like it is like, whereas you have like one cigarette a month or something retarded, get like, because it doesn't, it hits you like it hits, like gambling hits me, like. But like for me, like, I get about a pack of cigarettes, and I will, like if I start, I have to be very conscious, because once that is definitely something that gets in your, like a parasite that takes hold, and I'm like, no, it's really addictive. I've been addicted to it. That's just some stupid shit you read on an X. And he's like, no, it's a cybop. It's just the programming that like they told you it was addictive. They think it's addictive. And I'm like, now do homosexuality. And he's like, what? And I was like, incidence of it was really low. And they said it was real. And it was okay. And like that, this is just, people were just born that way. We both grew up in that world and whatever. Yeah. So it's just interesting. Like, you can do that with like a lot of things, and like when did the psyop start and end and all that shit. So.
Yeah, I mean, but the psyop, calling things a psyop can also be a psyop, and I mean, we mentioned Yuri Bezmenov before. He said that the goal of the Soviet psyops was to cause people to be unable to trust their own eyes. That they couldn't tell what was real or not, and this bewildering vortex of not just misinformation, but allegations of misinformation. You could be told, eating meat and veggies is good for you, and someone else would say that's misinformation that's being spread by big beef or whatever. There's like a talking point formula you could basically fit any claim within, and it will convince some number of people. Like, oh, I heard this other thing. Like. The psyop, calling things a psyop can itself be a psyop. There was some talk that actually happened with certain kinds of election claims. I'm sure it's been done in other cases. There's a long history in military history of so-called false flag attacks, where people put on different uniforms and do things. I mean, the Boston Tea Party was kind of that. This it reminds me of the scene in Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, where he's in the Hall of Mirrors, right? And when a strike comes out from behind some mirrors, if you don't know the labyrinth, you're looking around, it seems to be coming from all directions at once, and then it withdraws and it was nothing, and you've just been clawed by this bad guy with the claw. You have to strike the mirrors. You have to break the mirrors in order to be able to see the opponent. But we've become so attached to the mirrors. I want to make a joke about narcissists. Like, we've become so attached to our mirrors because they are so the tools that we have built for ourselves, whether these are epistemological constructs or institutions that we rely on or technology to feed us information, we become addicted to them. They get inside of us. They become a part of our habits, which say our neural circuitry. And we have to, at some point, if we are to be able to see clearly and escape the Hall of Mirrors, I'm mixing my movies badly here, but we have to at some point, open the cabin and launch not just that, those crutches out into space, but possibly lose some other things along the way. If we're to be fair, it's, for those who haven't seen it, a reference to the end of Alien, where Sigourney Weaver is on her escape pod, and turns out the alien's there with her, so she very sneakily gets into her spacesuit, straps herself in, and then opens the hatch, basically, and the alien floats off into space, and shockingly doesn't die immediately until she like blasts it with her rocket, basically. But yeah, these escaping the influence of these ideologies, and these other things that get inside of us. On the one hand, it feels like a compulsion, especially when it's symbolically captured and described as a kind of alien. But what if that's what we are? What if all we are? What if we are a sort of Portuguese man of war that's just this colony of different sub-identities, some of which are external, a few of which we were born with, but which are nonetheless still in an uneasy equilibrium with each other and sometimes conflict. As Solzhenitsyn very famously said, maybe the line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every man. And what if, we are like Sigourney Weaver in maybe the later movies? Maybe we've got a little bit of this alien in us now. It's tricky stuff to think about, and it's easy to think, I think, too symbolically as well. Which is a danger I've noticed in many esoteric circles. It's things that begin as metaphorical descriptions, and I this is the really, really sad case of the mythopoetic men's movement when they talk about the like inner feminine within man and stuff. Things that begin as metaphors, as ways of explaining things in terms of other things, evolve into identities, saying no, you have an inner feminine within you. It's not like some shadow thing that is like the inner feminine in trying to explain it. No, you need to become more feminine. And the evolution from that Jungian archetype to a modern sort of therapist's bad take on Jung sort of maps this crossing some threshold from metaphorical language into identity language. And there is maybe a danger of doing that with some of these sub-identities too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You just said a lot there, and I was like, as you were doing it, I was thinking of like how deep we would sound if I like just spliced that all together, like just cut out the spots. I'm like, there's a lot going on there. But one thing I do think you should do is that use the Bruce Lee metaphor, the Hall of Mirror things. Go back to that in something like I don't care if it's an Instagram post or whatever. You should use that for something because it's good. That you have to kill the mirrors. That's a very visceral thing that if people, I mean, I've seen the movie, so I know what you're talking about, and I think a lot of guys have. So I think it's one of those things.
If you haven't seen Enter the Dragon,
yeah,
Bruce Lee,
are you even a man?
Great... Huh?
I said,
yeah.
Are you even a man?
There's so many great bits of. I mean, it's got the finger pointing towards the moon, which is a great little scene of its own. One of my favorite things is apparently Bruce Lee insisted on including a line of dialogue, which they weren't going to include. The director wasn't going to include, but Bruce Lee was like, no, you have to have this dialogue or this movie is not going to happen. And it's a scene where Bruce Lee, who's being sent onto this island to fist fight some evil bad guy, he has to ask the question, why don't you just send someone with a gun? And they come up with some crazy, like, oh, there's this weird, goofy plot reason why that's not practical in this particular case. And it's like, okay, got it. We'll send a guy unarmed. But Bruce Lee's like, no, a gun beats every martial art. Like, don't pretend that's not a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and then at the very end, there's this famous scene where he is, up against the evil bad guy who has this strange claw device on his hand, and he winds up in this this like maze of mirrors, and the guy keeps like popping out from behind one and slashing him across the chest. And then Bruce Lee turns around and he's like coming from every direction, and he recalls the words of his master. I don't remember what the advice was, but it inspires him. It's like, oh, I can just break these mirrors. And so he starts just kicking the mirrors down, and then the guy has nowhere else to hide. And the fight progresses from there. Great movie.
Nice. I mean, there's a lot of that's a good metaphor to use. It's a powerful one. But cool. Do we have any more comments, or are we ready to wrap up?
Brock had said, "Great discussion tonight." Got a decent number of watchers, not too many comments. I wonder if many people maybe haven't seen the older Alien, which is possible. There's also just a lot going on too. It's one of those films. There's some films that are like fun, but like, oh, that was a great watch. I wouldn't go back and watch it again. Alien is like a work of art. There's so much it's hard to convey. Just the opening 3 minutes before any character has even said anything, the ambiance that's set up is so ominous, and the scale is so vast. And they do it all with sound, and in some cases the absence of sound. And like you were saying before, the color, the lighting, the pans, just the aesthetics of the ship you could talk about for a good 15-20 minutes too. But
oh yeah, the way they did futurism in that era was great. And also, like, I forgot, I love that they smoke in space. They're smoking cigarettes in space. Like they didn't get the memo from California in between there that we're not allowed to smoke, and they everybody smokes in space, which I think is because it seemed like that ship smells terrible. Like that ship smells like a bar, like an old bar. Yeah, but it's kind of funny to think about it that way. It's very different from the way that we would picture space now. Like I actually saw a movie that came on after it. It got to a point where the main character did something that was so fucked up that I was just, I'm turning this off. Fuck you. But it was called The Passenger, and it was a very new movie. It's basically this guy was being sent out on a colonist. Everything is about waking up from hypersleep in these fucking movies. And basically, his pod, they go through an electrical storm, and his pod opens up, and none of the other pods open up. And so, apparently, he has 90 more years, or like 50 more years, or something like that, to until they get to their destination where everybody else gets woken up. And he can't talk to customer service. Like he's like going. Basically, it's kind of a joke. Like he's on this like thing that's basically a luxury transport. And there's like, high-end suites in there, whatever, and there's like because basically they're supposed to wake up for 4 months before they get there, and it's just be this great, like, awesome, like, cruise ship, basically. Like it actually, the vibe of it was actually more like an all-inclusive resort at Cancun, but it was like this great place that he head to, and he only got to talk to the robot bartender because everybody else is still asleep, and he just goes slowly insane, and like but very different vibe from like, kind of blue collar workers, the smoking in space, which is what Aliens is kind of all about, So yeah,
they're very clearly like the futuristic equivalent of like crab fishermen, or something like that. The guys arguing about like, oh, we should really get more of a share for this haul. Like, oh, we're not supposed to go out following beacons. Well, it's actually in your contract. Oh shit, it's like it's a very it's blue collar. Even the sort of sexual innuendo around the breakfast table at the beginning was very blue collar. Like
it's very blue collar if you think about it. It's like it's kind of in that vein of movies from that era. Like that Deer Hunter. Have you ever seen that?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Okay, I get super like classic from the vaguely the same period.
Was Smokey and the Bandit from about that time?
Probably, yeah.
About then.
But yeah, there are a lot of like kind of grumbly blue collar like movies like that, where it's like I just remember like the bars that they would go to in Deer Hunter, which I think was set in Pennsylvania actually, but it's kind of like this blue collar town, and everybody goes to the bar and like they've got other fucking problems, and it's just generally that kind of vibe. I think when filmmakers were kind of captivated by that this kind of Rust Belt kind of I don't know, like idea, and it's very much Rust Belt in space. It's kind of, it feels very like normal to me being from Pennsylvania, like a bunch of people like smoking and arguing in bars about like fucking work. Because I do remember when you could still smoke in bars. So, it's the thing. Well, you still can in Vegas, but that's always the weirdest thing about Vegas. Like what? But anyway, if we don't have any more comments, I guess we should probably wrap this up. I think we've exhausted space. Dragons.
Oh, we have a long comment. Lucius Cincinnati says, listen to a 2-hour alien lore video the other night after the topic of tonight's podcast was mentioned in a Telegram. Found out Blade Runner is in the same universe as Alien. Well, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, someone had mentioned that in our Telegram at some point, and it was. I'd have to go back and look at that and figure that out. I mean, is the corporation name the same? Because that would be the through line, I would think. But
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep might be another one to talk about at some point. The book behind Blade Runner for people, which I've read about like 10 pages of several years ago and meant to go back to, but haven't. There's a whole.
I thought it was a short story.
It might be. There's a whole collection of like cyberpunk. There's like Snow Crash. There's Neuromancer.
I tried to get into William Gibson. I think like when I was in my 20s at some point. I read a little bit of that kind of stuff. Yeah. He's probably the author I've been told to read the most. William Gibson?
Yeah. The Neuromancer in particular. So I should probably read that at some point.
maybe, or maybe it'll be like out of date. Like who knows?
Yeah. Perhaps so.
But anyway. Cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap this up. The next week's episode will be on Warhammer 40K. Kind of continuing our sci-fi theme, and basically we're doing this because I would say, I wouldn't go out to say like a big percentage, but I would say like 10 to 20% of the guys in the First Men have some background with Warhammer 40K. And there's this whole mythology, and actually, like, the thing that you brought up about the space bugs or whatever, the Tyranids. Yeah, I mean, he sent me he sent a link to that to me, so I'd actually read the description of what they are like, and he's like, "This rings a bell." He wasn't familiar with the alien movies at all, but like he was like, the same thing. So actually, Montana will be the one joining us. So we're going to have 3 of us on the podcast next week to talk about Warhammer 40K. And I will be the retard because I don't know anything about it. I was just like, what are you guys talking about? Like I said, in my mind, it's like it overlaps with World of Warcraft. Like there's this, it's like these things that these people do. And it just totally, I've never, I don't think it was actually, when was it invented? When did start?
I want to say at some point in the 90s. I could be wrong on that though. It was very separate from World of Warcraft and Warcraft in general. It's its own thing. Might have been later actually. It might have been the 2000s, but tabletop game is like, I think I might have said this before, but it's interesting as a world creation tool. Because it's it is a tabletop game, but like as you're saying, a lot of guys are into it for just the lore. Like they don't even have the models; they just like reading the stories. There's a whole books about it. There's one Space Marine Legion that like defected to Chaos. There was like the biker one, if I remember correctly. There's like the Blood Angels. And most of that's about the Space Marines and Chaos, but and then there were guys like me who were purely into it for the strategy, like oh, how can I set up my army to do some just really crazy maneuver tactics to just blow the other team out of the water. It's more like a chess game, but with more pieces and more variability. And some guys were into really not the gaming and not so much the lore, but just the painting. I actually have a coworker who was just started getting into Warhammer 40K last year, and he's all about just painting. Like he's tried the gaming. He's like, it's kind of fun, but it's mostly just painting, and like that artistic side really comes out too. And when you combine all three of those, you get something that's very culturally powerful and interesting. And you see that a little bit with Dungeons and Dragons too. There's very little in the fantasy world that Dungeons and Dragons hasn't like profoundly influenced.
Oh, for sure. Like I think if the timing is correct, like I was already a man when Warhammer 40K came out, so like I would have missed that. But I did try to play Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, like that was all the rage. I remember the Saturday morning cartoon. Like that was all the rage when I was a kid. And that was the early phase of it, of all that.
Okay, I'm looking up right now. The first edition of the Warhammer 40K rulebook was published in September of 1987.
Okay.
But this came out in England, in Britain, before in the United States. So we wouldn't have experienced it until the 90s.
Right. Okay. So it didn't blow up. Like, like I graduated from high school in '93. So like it would have been a little. That's why I was always like, "What are you guys talking about? What?" But it's a little bit after my time. But yeah, no. I mean, a lot of guys are really into it, and I mean, it made. I know from the imagery that it became a big thing in the last time Trump was elected. The whole God Emperor version of like Trump or whatever became like part of the whole mythology. So it's really powerful for men. It's influenced a lot of men.
So this is some of the artwork you might see with, I don't know if you can see this, Chaos, and the codexes are full of like artwork. It's as much, I mean, this is mostly text, but there's a clear style to how everything is put together, and like it influences the whole vibe of the game in a neat way. I picked this up a couple years ago and I haven't opened it since, but that was my recollection when I was playing mostly Dark Eldar, who got renamed Drukhari. They're kind of their own space dragons in a way, but they're more humanoid. They're just torture demons basically. But they they've got their, anyways, we'll get into it more next week, but getting into it already.
I'll just sit here and be like the silent guy, and you guys can talk about Warcraft. Warhammer. But
it's gonna be your little nag.
I'm totally boomering this.
Warcraft.
Next episode of Warcraft. It's not meant to be insulting. I'm just boomering.
I know.
Anyway, that'll be our next episode. I think, like I said, it's a powerful thing, and the idea of this world creation, I think is very relevant to our project. Someone just sat down and created all this thing. Look at how alive this is for like so many young men, and so, or men who are like in their like 30s now. It's a very powerful thing. So it's worth thinking about from that perspective as well. So anyway, all right, guys. Till next time, stay solar.